So you'd think that NBA free agency was done because there hasn't been that much actual news lately. But we're going to talk about 5 NBA free agents who are still available and I think have some value for an NBA team still, or a decent amount of value depending on who we're talking about. Now there's a lot of guys who are unsigned, but I'm not going to talk about some guys who I just think aren't that good. So like Tyler Zeller or Monte Ellis. And then there's guys who I think are going to be re-signed with their teams that they've been on, so I'm not going to talk about them. That would be like Mason Plumlee and JaMychal Green, for example. So let's just talk about 5 guys. We're going to start with Nerlens Noel. I think Nerlens thought he was going to get a lot more money this offseason than, what ended up happening. The reality is, like, the NBA is not the same that it was 2 years ago when the cap jumped up and every single team had cap space. If Nerlens was a free agent then, he would have got a max contract offer. But in the offseason now, where NBA centers are not as sought after as they once were, on top of just not everybody having as much money, yeah, this sort of thing can happen for a guy like Nerlens, especially when there are some questions about his health on top of, I guess there have been some character issues with him, so I guess there was some concern with other NBA teams. The weird thing is that the Mavericks and Nerlens' agent just haven't really agreed to a deal. I have to assume that Nerlens' people think he's worth one thing and the Mavericks think he's worth something else entirely. I mean, if I was Dallas, I probably would want to throw a more conservative offer at him, and then if he proves himself, then give him the big contract, and they probably want the big contract right now, them being, Nerlens and his agent and all that. I mean, I don't know, I'm kind of intrigued on him, man, because I think if they really could just never agree, and it got to something to where he was, like, available in a trade or something, then I think a lot of teams would be willing to make that sort of a move. But then at the same time, maybe they don't want to go through this headache again with him. I mean, to me, Nerlens has got all the potential in the world as an awesome defensive player and the type of center that you want in today's NBA. But at the same time, he hasn't proven it just yet. Like, he's shown good signs, but he hasn't taken off. And, I mean, you could say that some of that's because of, like, playing next to Jahlil Okafor in Philadelphia and not getting a ton of minutes in Dallas, but whatever. I think it's really interesting that it wasn't a no-brainer for Dallas to just be like, yeah, let's just bring Nerlens back. So we'll have to see what happens there. Nikola Mirotic. He's a stretch 4 who this previous season couldn't make any three-pointers. So that's a problem. Upon entering the NBA, he showed pretty good signs as a dude who could be a floor spacer and have some other capabilities offensively, and it just really hasn't taken off at this point. He seems to be like a spot shooter, and I would say defensively he hasn't really made a lot of strides. But at the same time, I don't think Chicago's offense was very good for a player like him because, I don't know, if there's only one guy who can shoot, then the spacing impact that you make might not be as valuable because, let's say if Jimmy Butler's driving inside, but then Dwayne Wade, Rajon Rondo, and Mirotic are the other guys in the game, then you could just help off Rondo and D Wade and leave Mirotic there, and as a result, he's not as valuable, But even so, he wasn't making his three-pointers when he actually had the opportunities this season. And that's going to be the big question with him is, like, can he just knock him down? Because he only shot 34% from 3 this season, which isn't terrible, but it's not that good either. His second year when he shot 39%, that's a lot better. Look, everybody wants stretch 4s, and Mirotic is at least the template of that. I mean, I think a team like Minnesota could definitely use him if he was actually making his three-pointers in. We'll just have to see with him. The next one's Tony Allen. And the reason I say Tony Allen, I mean, you'd think it's a shoo-in that he's going to be back with the Memphis Grizzlies, right? I mean, potentially. But the deal hasn't happened yet. They haven't even re-signed JaMychal Green yet, but I do think they would place JaMychal Green's priority over Tony Allen for a myriad of reasons. Age, play style, the position he plays at power forward. Who says that a contender doesn't throw a generous offer at Tony Allen just to play defense for them about 15 to 20 minutes a night? I don't know, man. It's one of those things where you think the guy is definitely going to return to the Grizzlies, but then he and JaMychal Green's restricted free agency has just kept on keeping on, and if JaMychal perhaps ends up on the Grizzlies for, I don't know, $12 to $14 million, maybe at that point Memphis just says, you know what, Tony, unless you're willing to take a bit less, we might not be able to keep you. Especially because if I assume how much money JaMychal Green's going to go for, that's going to push them pretty much right up to the luxury tax. So maybe then a contender steps in and just wants Tony Allen for what he can do on the defensive side of the floor, and then they'll figure out how to use him in the playoffs when teams just don't defend him whatsoever. The next one I want to talk about is Dante Cunningham, who has been a wing player for the Pelicans for a few seasons now, who I would say is really more of like a small ball power forward, but he can play some small forward as well. He's a good defensive player. He can defend a few positions. He can switch a bit, and his three-pointer actually became a thing this season. He's not like a go-to three-point shooter. I think he took around 2 a game, so he's not just going to hoist him up there. But if you leave him open, some good things can happen for the team that he's on. But the Pelicans have not re-signed him, which I think they probably should, because they need some resemblance of decent wing players. But they haven't, and I mean, I think a team like the Cavaliers could definitely use Cunningham for what he can do defensively. But I mean, if it was up to me, then the Cavaliers would have acquired freaking Cephalosha. They would have acquired Cunningham as well this offseason, and they went and signed Derrick Rose. So I don't know what's up with the Cavs. But, I mean, Cunningham is the type of player that's one of the more wanted type of dudes in the NBA today, which is wing players who can defend multiple positions as well as be a three-point shooter. So I assume he's going to get a contract offer from somewhere. It's not going to be through the roof because his offense is almost non-existent, to be honest. The three-pointer helps, but before that, he really wasn't going to do much for you offensively. But still, a low-usage guy who could just come in and just kind of make you better without really popping out in the stat sheet. It's never a bad thing to have, especially because it won't cost that much. And the final one is Shabazz Muhammad, who's been on the T-Wolves for the last 4 seasons. I think Shabazz is similar to like Dion Waiters almost, in that you see the offensive potential, but he just hasn't really found a way to turn it into winning basketball just yet, because I mean, first off, he's a pretty strong dude, 6'6", 225 pounds. He's a big guy who can attack the rim pretty effectively. He hasn't played too many minutes in the NBA, but he's still found a way to get to the free throw line more often than you'd think for a guy who plays around 20 minutes a game. He's shown some ability to like just be physical and attack in the rim, and he's shot a good percentage from the field. He shoots around 48% from the field in his career, which is 4 seasons long. But there are some concerns with Shabazz as well, one of which is the three-point shot has never come around. He shot 39% his second year, and since then he hasn't shot well. Also, he might be the biggest ball hog in the NBA, because he shoots about 7 or 8 times a game, and he averages less than 1 assist, while averaging a little more turnovers than he has assists in his career. So there are definitely some problems with him, but the offensive potential is definitely there. I think if you find a head coach who can kind of take the ball out of his hands, but then give him the ability to like cut to the rim and come across screens and maybe get his defender reeling just a bit to where he can attack the rim off of like 1 or 2 dribbles, that's where I think Shabazz can be good, or he's just going to have to get smarter as a player as well as improve his three-point shot. The potential is definitely there, and I think someone who's looking to just get some scoring off their bench, or maybe a team who isn't really concerned with making the playoffs can take a flyer on him and maybe he can become something for them. Apparently the Wolves are trying to convince him to return for the minimum. I don't know, if I was him, I would hold out a little longer. I think you could find someone willing to take a chance, but I like Shabazz's potential. He just has to like round out the edges of his game, I guess.